4 continents in the corner, and Great Britain has been made much larger in scale.
When workers began routine maintenance inside Camilla's private estate, no one expected to stumble upon a hidden chamber sealed behind her son's bedroom wall. What they uncovered was no ordinary find. It was a secret that carried the weight of memory, grief, and unresolved history.
Well, there were 3 of us in this marriage, so it was a bit crowded.
Within the dust and shadows lay something so personal, so haunting, that it reignited wounds thought long buried. But what could possibly emerge from the darkness that left even the royal family utterly speechless? This is that shocking discovery. The day routine became revelation. What began as a routine inspection at Camilla's secluded private estate quickly turned into a revelation that threatened to shake the monarchy to its core. The day had started quietly, with workers moving from room to room, assessing structural integrity, making notes, and tapping along walls for the faintest signs of damage. Their job was simple: check for cracks, leaks, and hidden weaknesses that might over time undermine the safety of the property. Yet none of them could have predicted what they were about to uncover in the most unlikely of places: the bedroom belonging to Tom Parker Bowles, Camilla's eldest son. It began innocently enough. While surveying one of the walls, a worker's attention was caught by a faintly uneven line concealed beneath layers of plaster and hidden behind a decorative panel. At first glance, it seemed trivial, the sort of irregularity expected in older homes where time leaves its fingerprints in subtle cracks and fading paint. The assumption was that it was nothing more than the harmless scars of age. Yet something about this seam felt different. Almost too deliberate, too carefully hidden. Curiosity led to a closer examination. When a hand knocked gently against the surface, the sound that echoed back was not solid stone or brick, but a strange, hollow vibration, as though the wall itself was concealing a space behind it. The workers exchanged uneasy glances. This was no ordinary blemish. Something lay concealed, deliberately tucked away in silence for decades. Protocol demanded that nothing further be disturbed until a higher authority could be consulted. Within minutes, estate security had been summoned, and soon after, palace officials arrived with strict instructions. The atmosphere shifted from casual inspection to tense urgency. Guards stationed themselves by the door, the workers stepped back, and the once ordinary bedroom seemed to transform into a stage where history itself was about to perform an unexpected act. Under careful supervision, the plaster around the irregular seam was chipped away. The room grew quiet, the air thick with anticipation. Each strike of the tool echoed like a drumbeat, as though the walls themselves resisted giving up their secret. And then, at last, the panel loosened and gave way, revealing the dark, dust-choked cavity hidden behind. What lay beyond was not the result of natural decay or forgotten renovations. This was no accident of time. It was something else entirely. A concealment executed with precision, buried with the intent to remain undiscovered. The space was narrow, claustrophobic, its stale air thick with the breath of decades long gone. Whoever had sealed it away had done so deliberately, ensuring that its contents would never meet the light of day without force. The officials peered into the opening, flashlights piercing the gloom, and the workers instinctively held their breath. They knew they had stumbled upon something extraordinary, something far beyond their original task. This was no mere hidden flaw of an old estate. This was a secret, purposefully entombed in stone and plaster, waiting, perhaps even daring, to be found. The discovery left everyone unsettled, for in that moment it became clear they were not just dealing with architecture or forgotten renovations. They were standing at the threshold of a mystery that carried the weight of intent, secrecy, and perhaps even scandal. A secret long hidden behind Tom's wall now threatens to break the monarchy's silence. But what kind of truth was so dangerous it had to be buried away for decades? Now, let's uncover how a hidden passage revealed a chest sealed with dangerous secrets. The Corridor of Silence. When the final fragments of plaster crumbled away, the sight that met their eyes sent a ripple of unease through the room. Behind the broken wall, hidden from view for decades, stretched a narrow corridor cloaked in dust and silence. The air that seeped out was heavy, stale, and suffocating, as though time itself had been trapped inside with no escape. Each step into that space felt less like a discovery and more like an intrusion into something deliberately meant to remain sealed away. This was no grand passageway designed for flight or safety, unlike the hidden routes often whispered about in royal history. There were no broad stone steps or elegant arches meant to carry kings and queens to safety. Instead, the corridor was cramped and suffocating, its walls pressing in with oppressive weight, forcing those who entered to move cautiously and with unease. It did not invite escape. It demanded silence. It was not a design of protection but of concealment. The deeper they pressed into the narrow channel, the more unsettling it became. The dust clung to their clothes and faces, cobwebs stretched across corners like veils of forgotten memories, and the faint scuttle of unseen insects echoed in the quiet. This was a place untouched by life for decades, perhaps longer, as though the world outside had moved forward while this chamber remained locked in a suspended, airless eternity. And then, at the farthest point of the corridor, the flashlight beams fell upon something that froze every breath in the air. There it stood. An iron-bound chest, squat and unyielding, its wood warped by time yet still solid, its blackened iron bands clinging to it with the strength of centuries. Dust coated its surface in thick layers, yet even beneath that cloak of age, the chest carried an aura of intent. It had not been left there casually, nor had it drifted into place by chance. Its position was too precise, perfectly centered within the alcove as though chosen deliberately, as though someone had placed it with care and purpose, ensuring it would remain until its time of discovery arrived. The lock, though rusted, still glinted faintly under the light, a quiet testament to its resilience. Whoever had secured this chest had wanted it sealed, had wanted it to endure. This was not clutter discarded by history. It was not some forgotten trunk abandoned in the chaos of renovation. This was an object hidden with determination, preserved with secrecy, and left with intent. The silence of the corridor seemed to grow louder, pressing on those who stood before the chest. The discovery did not feel like triumph, but intrusion, as though they had broken into a chamber where secrets had been deliberately laid to rest, and where even the air whispered warnings not to disturb what had been entombed. What secrets did this chest guard keep? Why had it been sealed so carefully, hidden so deeply, and left in a corridor designed not for escape, but for erasure? The questions swirled heavily in the minds of those present, each one more troubling than the last. This was no accident. This was a message, a burden from the past waiting, perhaps unwillingly, to be unearthed. The chest had not been waiting to be found. It had been waiting to be opened. But what lay inside? Was it jewels, forgotten heirlooms, or something far more powerful, something that could change the future of the crown? Let's find out, when secrets replaced treasure. The air inside the narrow corridor had already been heavy with anticipation, but nothing compared to the silence that fell when the iron-bound chest was finally dragged into the open. Its weight alone suggested importance, its lock clinging with the determination of decades. As the final hinge groaned and the lid creaked upward, everyone in the room seemed to hold their breath. For a moment, there lingered the wild hope of jewels, gold, or priceless heirlooms. Treasures fit for a crown, relics of a monarchy that had always cloaked itself in wealth and ritual. But that hope was shattered in an instant. There were no sparkling jewels, crowns, or royal treasures to be found. Instead, nestled within the chest were stacks of papers, bound with faded ribbons whose colors had long turned to ghostly grays and pale blues. The parchment was fragile, yellowed with age, and the ink had seeped softly into the fibers. At first, the discovery seemed almost ordinary, mere scraps of paper where riches had been expected. But the moment the handwriting appeared, unmistakably personal and deliberate, the air shifted from casual curiosity to stunned disbelief. The penmanship was instantly recognizable. It was her hand, Diana's. These were not carefully chosen letters written for public release, nor the polished remarks she had once allowed to be aired in interviews. These were something else entirely: private journals, raw fragments of her unguarded truth. Each line pulsed with emotion, each page whispered with confessions never meant to be read by strangers. The words carried no filter, no performance. They were the pure outpourings of a woman who had felt unseen and unheard inside the gilded walls of royalty. The journals bled with honesty. There were passages filled with aching loneliness, words that painted vivid pictures of nights spent in silence where, even surrounded by grandeur, she felt invisible. Other entries crackled with frustration and quiet defiance, as though she was writing against a world that refused to acknowledge her pain. And woven through it all was the haunting fear that her story, her very voice, would one day be silenced completely. Buried beneath the weight of the crown and its relentless machinery of image and control. What made the discovery all the more devastating was the intimacy of the writing. These were not statements prepared for history books, nor legacies shaped for posterity. They were letters to herself, words intended to exist only within the safety of secrecy. Yet here they were, hidden behind a wall in Camilla's son's bedroom, waiting silently for decades until fate forced them back into the light. For those present, the realization was staggering. They were not handling artifacts of wealth, but fragments of a soul. Each ribbon-bound stack represented pieces of Diana herself, her voice, her pain, her truth. Resurrected in ink long after her passing, the air seemed charged with her presence, as though the room itself pulsed with the weight of what had been uncovered. This was no treasure of gold or jewels. This was far more dangerous, far more powerful. It was Diana's unfiltered voice, a voice that refused to be erased, and one that threatened to reshape everything the monarchy thought it had buried. Why was this secret uncovered in Tom's bedroom? And who is he? Could it be that the secret was always meant to be revealed through words, and that the man best placed to carry it forward is the one whose life revolves around them? Now, let's delve into why Diana's words surfaced in the hands of Tom Parker Bowles. When fate chose a writer. What stunned both the palace and the public was not just the contents of the discovery, but its astonishing location. This revelation did not emerge from a secret royal archive or a long-forgotten chamber in a centuries-old palace. Instead, it was hidden in the most personal and unexpected of places, behind the bedroom wall of Tom Parker Bowles, Camilla's eldest son. The intimacy of the setting made the find all the more shocking and profound. Tom has never carried the weight of royal titles, nor has he lived under the same suffocating glare of monarchy as William and Harry. He has remained an observer rather than a participant, tethered to the royal orbit through bloodlines and circumstance, but carving out his own life in a very different sphere. His identity has always been tied to words, not crowns, first as a journalist, later as a food critic and author, and always as a man who built his craft on language, and narrative. His career has been one of interpretation, of shaping truth into stories for the world to read. And perhaps that was the cruelest irony of all, striking with the force of lightning. Hidden within his own quarters, sealed behind layers of plaster and stone, lay words.
Royal family stunned by hidden discovery. During routine maintenance at Queen Camilla's private estate, workers stumbled upon a sealed chamber behind her son's bedroom wall. What they uncovered wasn't ordinary. It was a secret so personal and haunting that it left the entire royal family speechless.
That defied expectation. These were not carefully edited articles or sentences crafted to satisfy an audience. No, these were the raw, unguarded words of Diana herself, a voice unfiltered, unshaped, and fearless. For years, her truth had been restrained, softened, and redirected by the weight of the institution around her. Yet now, it spoke freely, impossible to ignore. For years, Diana herself had expressed a deep fear that her story, her real story, would one day be softened into myth or erased by official narratives. She worried aloud that the memory of her vulnerabilities, her passion for the marginalized, and her struggles within the palace would be tidied into footnotes rather than preserved as they were truly lived. And now, decades later, her most private words, untouched and unshaped, had surfaced in the most unexpected hands, the son of the woman who replaced her in Charles's life. The twist was so striking, so laden with meaning, that few could accept it as mere coincidence. Diana's hidden voice did not surface in William's study, nor in Harry's distant refuge, but behind the walls of a man whose life revolved entirely around words and storytelling. Observers murmured that it was almost fate, as if destiny itself had ensured that her unfiltered truth would land in the hands of someone uniquely equipped to understand it, preserve it, and perhaps one day give it the life it deserved. For Tom, the discovery must have been disorienting. He had built a life separate from the royal machine, often resisting being defined by his connection to Camilla. Yet now, he found himself standing before the ghost of Diana, holding pages that could alter not just his own family's story, but the image of the monarchy itself. The symbolism was almost too perfect. Diana's voice, once muted by the crown, had risen in the quiet sanctuary of a writer. Tom Parker Bowles has become the unlikely keeper of a voice the palace once tried to silence. But what does this discovery truly mean for the monarchy, and how far will its echo reach? Now, let's unravel how Diana's words sparked panic, division, and reckoning. Whispers into wildfire, the revelation spread through the palace like a spark, catching dry kindling, igniting whispers that refused to be contained. What had begun as a quiet, almost accidental discovery now moved with the force of a storm through corridors that had long thrived on discretion and silence. The air within Buckingham Palace and beyond grew heavy with unease, for this was not simply another rumor or tabloid scandal that could be brushed aside with polished statements. This was different. This was tangible. This was Diana's own hand, her own voice, reaching across decades to remind the monarchy of a truth it had tried to bury. Courtiers, normally so measured and composed, began to murmur in hushed tones that carried an unusual urgency. Should the contents of the chest be disclosed, laid bare for the world to see in their raw and fragile honesty? Or should they be locked away again, destroyed if necessary, in the name of preserving the institution? The palace was no stranger to crisis management. Entire systems had been built to weather controversy, to shield the monarchy from the harshness of public scrutiny. But the discovery of Diana's private writings presented no easy solution. This was never gossip, nor idle speculation, and certainly not the distorted tales spun by eager journalists chasing headlines. These were Diana's own words, raw, unfiltered, and utterly undeniable. Within each page lay her deepest confessions, the crushing loneliness behind the public smile, the quiet fears of being forgotten, and the haunting certainty that her truth might one day be erased by the very institution she had devoted herself to. These writings were more than words. They were a heartbeat, a soul reaching across time to be heard. The implications shook the foundations of royal authority. Legal experts were called in to examine every possible angle. Could the writings be considered personal property of the late princess and therefore belong to her sons? Or had they become, by strange circumstance, part of the monarchy's archives, to be hidden, managed, or selectively shared at the discretion of the crown? There were no clear precedents, no simple answers. Every option carried risks, and each one seemed to pull the monarchy into deeper waters. Palace insiders murmured that King Charles carried the heaviest burden of all. This discovery struck him not merely as a challenge to the monarchy, but as a deeply personal confrontation with memory, raw, painful, and tangled. To witness his late wife's private words resurfacing from behind the walls of his current wife's eldest son's bedroom was nearly unbearable. It felt as if the past had barged into his present, refusing to be ignored, demanding attention, and shattering the fragile calm he had painstakingly tried to maintain for both himself and the crown. The monarchy had endured rumors before. It had survived endless speculation, harsh criticism, and scandals that seemed designed to test its resilience. Yet rumors could be denied, dismissed, or drowned out. What it could not easily silence were Diana's words written in her own hand. Words that struck with the force of truth. And now, those words had risen, not from archives or interviews, but from a hidden chamber in Camilla's son's private quarters. This revelation is a reckoning the monarchy cannot ignore. But how will William and Harry respond? Will they let it stay buried? Or will their actions give Diana's silenced voice the attention it demands? Now, let's explore how their divided grief awakened truths long hidden. Brothers divided, yet bound by Diana's voice. For Princes William and Harry, the hidden discovery was never about politics, palace rules, or public image. It struck far deeper, into the heart, the memories, and the wounds they carried. It was intensely personal, raw, and unbearably heavy. In that moment, the weight of history, secrecy, and loss collided, and all they felt was the sharp ache of grief. The moment they learned that the chest contained their mother's private writings, the air seemed to shift. These were not carefully drafted public letters or statements shaped for sympathy. They were Diana's most vulnerable words, raw and unguarded, pulled straight from the depths of her heart. For her sons, reading them felt like stepping into a time capsule of their mother's voice, honest, broken, hopeful, and afraid all at once. It was as if she had reached across time, speaking directly to them, bypassing the crown, the courtiers, and the history books. William, always cautious and protective of the monarchy's fragile reputation, immediately felt the weight of responsibility pressing down on him. He worried that if these deeply personal confessions ever reached the press, they would not be respected as their mother's truth, but ripped apart for headlines, sensationalized until their meaning was lost. To him, restraint felt like protection, a shield not just for the monarchy, but for Diana's dignity. He wanted to preserve her voice, not watch it be shredded into tabloid spectacle. Harry, on the other hand, felt no such hesitation. Freed by distance, both literal and emotional, he was outraged. To him, the very fact that their mother's words had been hidden in Camilla's son's private quarters felt like betrayal, piled upon betrayal. Diana had feared her voice would be silenced, and now, decades later, here was proof. For Harry, there was no time for caution. He demanded immediate transparency, insisting that her truth should not be controlled, filtered, or contained by the very institution that had often tried to bury it. Though their grief brought William and Harry together in shared sorrow, their instincts collided with searing intensity. Long-buried wounds, shaped by contrasting roles, life choices, and perspectives, resurfaced with undeniable force. William, bound by the weight of duty as heir, approached with caution and care. Harry, the free-spirited spare, demanded openness and truth. Both sought to honor their mother's memory, yet their methods diverged completely, revealing a poignant tension between responsibility and rebellion, tradition and freedom, love and loss. To outsiders, the rift between William and Harry appeared unfixable, a chasm shaped by years of difference and diverging paths. Yet beneath the visible tension lay an undeniable reality, a bond forged by love and shared loss. Their mother's voice, once thought erased by time and circumstance, had resurfaced. Those long-hidden words now called out with urgency and clarity, insisting that they be acknowledged, understood, and never silenced again. No matter their differences, neither William nor Harry could allow those words to be buried again. For them, this was not about power or politics. It was about love, memory, and justice for the woman who had given them both life and purpose. And in that moment, even in division, they carried the same vow. Diana's voice would live on. William and Harry promised their mother's voice would never be buried. But beyond her words, what keeps Diana alive in the hearts of the world forever? Let's find out. A legacy that refused to stay buried. Diana's rediscovered journals did not simply add a few hidden pages to the royal record. They reopened a chapter the monarchy had worked for decades to carefully close. What emerged from behind the wall was not just paper, ink, and ribbons frayed with time, but a voice that once shook the world, and suddenly spoke again with startling clarity. For the royal family, it was not just a discovery, it was a reckoning. For years, Princess Diana had been remembered through images carefully preserved in public memory. The radiant humanitarian, the glamorous yet relatable princess, the woman who walked into AIDS wards when fear and stigma kept others away. She had been celebrated as a champion of the vulnerable, a mother whose devotion to William and Harry softened the harshness of royal protocol, and as a global icon who campaigned against landmines with unmatched courage. Her compassion defined her, her empathy reshaped how the monarchy was seen, and her charitable work inspired millions across continents. But these journals unveiled something deeper, the heart behind the public figure. The Diana who emerged in these pages was not only the charitable princess the cameras adored, but also a woman who struggled with fears, who wrestled with invisibility, and who questioned whether her truth would ever survive beyond the palace walls. In fragile handwriting, sometimes shaky, sometimes sharp, she admitted her greatest dread, that her legacy would be softened, reshaped, or silenced by the very institution that had so often failed to hear her. This was not the Diana of glossy magazines or carefully edited interviews. This was Diana as she saw herself, unguarded, raw, emotional, and utterly human. In one passage, she reflected on her work with children, not in the language of headlines, but in confessions about the pain she carried home afterward. In another, she questioned whether her efforts to challenge stigma, whether about AIDS, homelessness, or mental health, would ever outlast the narratives of palace scandal. What the world had seen as strength was here revealed as both triumph and burden, victories carved from loneliness and determination. And that is what made these journals so dangerous and so powerful. They gave Diana back her voice, not as a symbol created by others, but as a storyteller of her own life. Every faded ribbon that bound those pages seemed to unravel carefully crafted myths, reminding the world that Diana was not only a figure in history, but a woman who wanted to be remembered truthfully. For the royal family, this was the shock. Her voice had not vanished, nor could it be controlled. It had returned most unexpectedly, unearthed from behind the bedroom wall of Tom Parker Bowles, Camilla's eldest son. The irony was impossible to ignore. A woman who feared her words would be hidden forever was now speaking again from a place so intimately tied to the woman long accused of overshadowing her memory. It was no wonder that the discovery left the palace reeling. These were not treasures that could be locked away, nor relics to be displayed. They were confessions alive with the power to change how Diana was remembered. Not as myth, not as memory, but as voice. A voice unyielding.
Royal family stunned by hidden discovery. During routine maintenance at Queen Camilla's private estate, workers stumbled upon a sealed chamber behind her son's bedroom wall. What they uncovered wasn't ordinary. It was a secret so personal and haunting that it left the entire royal family speechless.